Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Antoine Gray. I'm VP of Technical Operations at NetX Information Systems. Today's webinar, Navigating the Regulatory Landscape, Unpacking the latest SEC regulations on data privacy and vulnerability management. Uh, we, from the NetX side, we will have Andy Tanous, who is our data governance practice lead, and from the vulnerability and patch management side of the house, we have Vicarius, which is represented by Gilad Lev. Next slide. So before we get into the real meat and potatoes, talk to you a little bit about who we are here at NetX. As you can see from our little logo wheel over here, we work with many of the large vendors, manufacturers from security, data backup, data protection, secure remote control, endpoint management, etc. We also offer authorized training services for Broadcom and Veritas related classes. We specialize in finding the right solution for your organization and assisting you with implementation services, etc. Next slide. NetX also offers any of our training customers and some select customers health check assessments. These health check assessments are at no cost. What we focus on ensuring that you've implemented these solutions as related to best practices to ensure that you're getting the most out of your investment. From a dark data assessment perspective, this again is a no cost assessment where we have the ability to scan your environment to ensure that any data that is not under your control is recognized and help you to come up with a plan for managing that data or eliminating that data. Some of the other services we actually offer are listed down below here, and we'll have contact information at the end of our presentation to help you get in contact with this sales representative to assist you should you need any services around these solutions that we are discussing either today or that you've seen on the previous slide. Next slide, please. So now, without further ado, we'll get into the real reason you came for our webinar today. Andy Tanous, take it away.
Thank you, Antoine, for passing that over. So thank you, everyone, for joining. So right now, we're going to discuss the importance of regulatory compliance and more so why you would need a D3P, which is a designated third-party reviewer to come in and make sure that you're compliant. So with that, we can see that there's been some rules that have come out the past couple of years. So with the enactment of the Dodd-Frank Act, the financial regulatory landscape has changed and financial institutions are challenged to comply with new rules and regulations permitting broker-dealers to store required records in electronic form. Under these rules, the electronic records must be preserved. They must be kept in a non-rewritable and non-erasable format. The objective of these regulations are to increase transparency and ultimately reduce systematic risk to capital markets. To increase focus on greater transparency has resulted in greater emphasis by regulators on record-keeping requirements, including those detailed in the SEC Rule 17A-4 and the CFTC's Rule 1.31. And you can see that there's an explanation of that in the slides a little bit further. So with the SEC rule and the FINRA regulations mandating broker clients to have D3P in place to meet these specific record requirements, this framework aims to maintain the transparency and security of financial records, protect investors, and ensure the stability of financial systems. Having a D3P offers several benefits, including regulatory compliance, enhanced data security, reliable data integrity, and expedited record retrieval. So with that, there are advantages over having in-house counsel and having a D3P. So With that, it ensures that everything adheres to the latest regulations. There's expertise over who has specialized profession in looking at the broader understanding of the compliance requirements. There's a broader pool talent to choose from. To outsource teams often have a wider range of skills and expertise. It can be more cost efficient than maintaining an in-house team to do the yearly reviews that you have. It also allows firms to focus on core business areas while outsourcing and handling compliance. So with that, designated third-party reviews are essential in any compliance framework. They offer an unbiased perspective and can be more thorough in identifying potential risk and issues. Third-party reviewers help navigate the intricate web of regulatory compliance, providing a secure foundation for electric records archival. They're also vital in maintaining data integrity as they verify the data is accurate, compliant, and relevant, which is necessary for making informed business decisions and maintaining the trust with clients and partners. So with that, this offers up our contact information here. So if you're interested in either reaching out to us about a D3P or any of the other services that we offer, this is our information right here.
Thank you so much for that, Andy. And we will show the contact slide again at the end of the presentation. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Gilad Lev from Vicarius to speak to an amazing platform that will assist in helping your organization get a handle on not only vulnerability management, but patch management as well. So with that, Gilad.
Thank you, Antoine, and thank you, Anne. And yeah, today we're going to talk about, specifically in the context of financials, what we find Vicarius doing to deal with vulnerabilities and patching. So just to give you a little bit of context, typically when we speak with banks, credit unions, different financial institutions, they have a lot of requirements, varying from SEC regulations, SOX, PCI DSS, all those different regulations boil down to being able to implement controls to protect data privacy. And with that, they have to have in place vulnerability management, patch management program to ensure the data privacy of their clients, of the financial data that they're carrying. And with that, typically the approach that financials will take when it comes to assessing vulnerabilities, if I might say, the traditional approach would be through scanning their networks, capturing once every month, once every few months, the networks that they have and what vulnerabilities exist there. And this used to be the approach for very much the past 20 or so years, just to run those regular scans to check the box. But with COVID and with the past few years with the cloud motion, as well as work from home motions, moving forward, we find that becoming ever more difficult for organizations to keep up with the sheer new vulnerabilities that come out, but also with the distributed environments that they have to manage. So if you have to manage different offices, people work from home, cloud workloads, just scanning a range of IPs won't cut it from what we see with our clients. And they find it ever more challenging just to keep up with those new vulnerabilities that come out across all those different types of devices. So just to give you a little bit of a context, about a story that, I had with a client. So, we were going to their environment and they happened to be a bank. They had around 4,000 assets. They had some endpoints, their servers, the regular mix, with an enterprise. They pulled up one of those traditional vendors, vulnerability scans, which do scan, right? You're going to get a bunch of vulnerabilities. And they showed us this figure. It was 4 million vulnerabilities for these few thousand devices. Of course, this is not something that they could cope with, especially in light of vulnerabilities like Log4j, that they really wanted to be able to get to the bottom of. but it required them to spend a lot of time going through each and every one of those devices, trying to figure out whether the libraries are vulnerable, whether the configuration inside the library is actually vulnerable, right? Because a lot of scanners just tell you, okay, you have a piece of software, you happen to be vulnerable. But is it so? So it requires more digging, more resources, more teams to have to get involved in order to validate and confirm the existence of a vulnerability. And that takes time. And that's where we find the prioritization kicks in. With the traditional approach being, with the CVSS based core, if we can break it down, the scoring that's being used to prioritize vulnerabilities, we can break it down into a couple of components. There is the environmental component, which is basing the criticality of a vulnerability, a security gap in software, based on the environment where this vulnerability resides. What I mean by that is that, say you have a database or web application, and the database or web application happen to be, say, exposed to the internet. It would, of course, increase the risk of it being exploited, right? If it were isolated, it's much less likely that someone would be able to get into it. So that's the environmental aspect that we find oftentimes is overlooked, because it's much easier to look at whether there is a vulnerability, on some vulnerability database out there, but it's much harder to monitor your environment and assess whether those same vulnerabilities happen to be exploitable. So we find that the traditional approach that just tells you you have a vulnerability, it happens to have a high CVSS base score that may not take into account the environment of the vulnerability and other threat elements, is not sufficient for us to tackle if you have millions of vulnerabilities, and even fewer than that. And once organizations deal with deprioritization, of course, this is more being done often than not by the security teams, they need to tackle the patching process. But then again, especially with financials, that's quite a cumbersome process, because you have different environments, because you have to test through the patching, because you have so many applications, some of which happen to be proprietary software, right? So you can't easily upgrade those. You have to call up a developer that's no longer working on this application. So we find that from the moment you're able to identify a vulnerability up to the moment you're able to actually fix it, it takes a lot of time. Not to mention that it might have been a 0-day. The vendor might have not released a patch. So there are many cases where this may extend and the environment stay exposed. So the patching typically is done for those different systems, right? For Windows, for Linux, for Mac OS, for all those Adobe's third-party software that you might have out there. And that would be the typical flow, but it would also incorporate some testing, staging environments that you would run through in order to perform a patch. And that's a process in it of itself. And oftentimes, the security lack visibility of that process. So it happens, on the IT side of the house, but they have competing priorities when it comes to fixing those vulnerabilities that were identified. Therefore, sometimes not being able to be compliant for much of the time. Not to mention that there are new vulnerabilities out there. As you can tell when you go on Blippi Computer or other websites, there are new vulnerabilities coming out. So just looking at feeds, like we find a lot of customers do, when we talk to different financials, they tell us we gone CISA, we gone different websites, and we kind of like grabbing the most important vulnerabilities through these feeds, but it's obviously not scalable, right? Especially when you're managing larger environments. So what do we do with VRX? So VRX is meant to help us tackle vulnerabilities from the point of detection through the prioritization to remediation. So our focus is providing the full tool set to tackle vulnerabilities. So we're not looking to silo the security from the IT, the detection from the remediation, because it's a single problem that we're trying to tackle. So that's why we're trying to streamline that and help organizations consolidate their resources with our solution. So our approach to this is different from the traditional approach that says you need to have 3 tools, one for identifying the vulnerability, another one for prioritizing, another one for remediating, and perhaps, you need another one for managing macOS because it's not covered. So we're looking to consolidate a lot of these efforts to make it easier for teams to stay compliant. So with that, we're trying to capture what you have on your network. So what I mean by that, which applications, you get the full inventory as far as operating systems, third-party software across Windows, Linux, Mac OS, and you're also able to capture network devices for our scanner. And this is being done by in a continuous basis because we have those agents that help us capture it. In addition to this, we're also going to be monitoring, and that's a key difference in the way that we approach this, monitoring those elements that are not just out there on the web, but the compensating controls you have in your organization and the way the applications behave in the context of your organization. So we're going to look at whether these same applications happen to be connecting with the internet, whether the applications happen to be running with elevated privileges. So that's the environmental element that I was discussing earlier. But also we're adding to it the data with the vulnerabilities, so we can tell that this, Apache web application happens to be exploitable for escalation of privileges. And we can tell that this application happened to be exposed to the internet. And we can also identify the specific exploits that helps access that particular application. So we're going to take these data points and correlate them in order to get you a risk score for the application. And this is all being done automatically. So this means that we don't need, security resources working on it and trying to grab the data from all over the place. But this is something that's being taken care of by our agents at the different data sources, data feeds that we work with that help us grab a picture that's comprised both of the environment where this data resides as well as other data points from different sources. And the key takeaway with our solution would be that we are also providing the remediation piece. So it's not about just telling you that you have a lot of problems or even bringing down the number of problems that you need to deal with, but it's about fixing those problems. And that's our bread and butter. So that's going to be the focus of this solution. Patch management, providing support for hundreds of third-party software natively, being able to deploy all those OS patches across Windows, Linux, Mac OS. In addition to this, we're also able to tackle some other cases where one might have to run some configuration changes. So we are able to implement those controls natively within the platform, even deploy new software, remove a piece of software to make sure that we're compliant. And this is especially useful because you might have a lot of in-house software. So in some cases, we just help you identify it and remove it because you get very simple view of all of the inventory. But in other cases, it's not as easy because you might have a piece of software that you need to keep around for business purposes and you can't easily, get rid of, even if it's, running on your 2008 server. So in those cases, we're able to implement something we call virtual patch. And this is a set of controls that help us monitor a specific workload against exploits. And in some cases, we're also able to actively protect against those exploits. So it's somewhat like, I would say, an EDR, but if you were to apply to a specific workload, to a specific application, and this will help you implement a compensating control that doesn't require shutting down the application while still being able to keep it running for the organization. So with this, just to recap, we help organizations and we focus on financials, just get visibility across their environment, prioritize those vulnerabilities, distill them, and implement different controls in an automated manner for remediation in a patching form, configuration management, as well as virtual patching. With this, perhaps if you have any questions, feel free to jump right in, and we'd be happy to cover them with you based on the information that we shared during the 2 presentations.
I'll go ahead and allow mics so that if anyone does have a question, you can go ahead and ask live. So all mics have been allowed. Just simply unmute and you may ask a question if you have one.
All right, and that's very good. We are happy to share some more information. So if you will, leave your email with a request for information, we'd be more than happy to share some more with you after this session. So those are some of the key challenges that we're looking to tackle with the solution, and the solution itself is quite intuitive. So what I mean by that, you're going to find that this is a very simple interface that you're going to be able to capture all these data and manage it with, because it's a platform essentially. So that's in terms of how we are working with organizations to tackle this. And of course, there are very granular use cases, very specific, that we can custom towards in terms of workflow, change management processes, different cadences as far as patch management, as well as vulnerability reporting, because we find oftentimes organizations quite struggle with getting the right insights about how they're trending over time. So if I were to show you here real quick, you'll be able to see that the interface itself is quite simple, and we're able to capture, as we're performing the remediation, whether there are new vulnerabilities out there or whether we were able to fix and mitigate them through the mitigation activities. So that's just a very simple view, and we won't dive into that very much today, but just to give you a quick glance of how you can tell what you have in your environment, what are the key risk factors throughout your environment, as well as some of the vulnerabilities that you can easily remediate via the same platform. So if you go here, you can easily perform the patching as well. And with that, I think we covered some of the key areas I wanted to cover today on my end. So Antoine, perhaps can bring it back to you.
Sure, perfect. So, Gilad, I do have a couple of questions I'd like to ask on behalf of the audience, if you don't mind.
Of course.
So, if I'm a customer and I have a vulnerability scanning product already, and I'm using a different vendor for patching. So if I think I'm covered there, what advantages would I gain by implementing a Vicarius? Although I do have these capabilities already in my environment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point. So what we find is that typically organizations don't uh, automate a lot of the remediation activities. So what you're going to find is that they will have some reporting on the vulnerabilities that they have, and they will see what they're struggling with around vulnerabilities and not keeping up with the new ones. But when it comes to fixing, they're going to have to use a host of other systems to perform the remediation across their Linux, Mac OS, Windows, and third-party software. And unfortunately, we find that oftentimes it's very simple and easy for organization to check the box on the remediation with software that supports just a handful of applications. So it can be like Chrome and Firefox, but the average organization you're going to find is going to be using hundreds of third-party software. And let me show you here real quick. Even if I grab here, just this handful of devices, these are approximately 11 machines here. We have over 1,000 applications. Now, this is a Linux environment, so you're going to have more packages, but you get my point. It can't deal with all of them with the traditional approach to fixing vulnerabilities. So that's what we're aiming to do, to just simplify the process and help us be more compliant with that.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And if I want to tailor the severity, so for instance, if there is a severity for a particular application, but based on my configurations, my network footprint, it's actually a lower priority. Do I have any flexibility in actually tailoring those ratings so that my reporting reflects my true environment?
Yeah, so we find that varying organization, especially for organizations getting larger, you're going to find that those organizations have different risk models, they have different priorities, they have different threats actors that are targeting them. So are the different threat vectors that are being used. And with that, one might need to customize their vulnerability measure according to that risk that they have on their organization. So with that, if you go here into a particular application or asset, you're going to find your full risk breakdown with all the different risk factors that we're able to capture for a particular application. And to each one of them, we have a corresponding weight. And this weight can be fully calibrated. And what this comes down to, as we calibrate those weights, we're going to see either fewer high-risk application or more high-risk applications. And so are the assets. So if I go here over to our asset management view that we have over here, you're going to be able to see whether those assets are at high risk or lower risk. And this risk calculation is taking into account the different applications on the assets, which patches are needed to be done for the OS, and other factors ranging from exploits that exist out there, as well as the environmental elements that I touched on earlier. So with that, yeah, it's quite customizable. Yet, as you can see with the interface, it's pretty simple. In terms of the setup, we found organizations just push out the deployment of the agent, and within a couple of minutes, they're basically able to capture what they have on the device and the different risks that they have, as well as performing some patches. So it's quite useful if you want a tool that's a bit simpler to use, even though there are some tools out there that have a lot of capability, but sometimes take a little bit of time to set up.
Absolutely. Just a couple of more questions, if you don't mind. You mentioned during your presentation that organizations sometimes have packages that are no longer supported by the manufacturer, or the developer is no longer available, or something of that nature, but the business is still dependent on that application. And Vicarius has a patchless protection capability. Can you expand a little bit on how that actually works?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a very good point. We find a lot of times with organizations, as much as they like to perform all the updates, if I go over here and show them all the patches that they have, they're like, wow, that's my dream. I want to apply 100 patches. But unfortunately, it's quite difficult to implement that. And to take the control back to the security, we developed something in the form of a virtual patch. So what is a virtual patch in our platform? First off, you can get your clear view of this section around the virtual patching. You'll be able to see the different modes that we can activate it in. So the initial mode will be the analyze mode. It will just tell us the system has been analyzed. So it will tell us whether we're able to identify different risk factors, vulnerabilities, identify the application itself, but it's not activated when it's analyzed. Once we turn on either the monitored or the protected mode, this will switch in the agent its activity. And what you're going to see that we're going to activate something in the form of a filter driver that will help us monitor specific system events that are targeting this particular application. So this is something that's at the OS level. We're essentially intercepting, essentially hooking, you might say, different calls that are being made to that piece of software. And we're going to be able to analyze through them, identify anomalies potentially, as well as actively block some of those if we were to apply it in protect mode. And the value with that we find with organization is multifaceted. Of course, keeping your applications running is great. For compliance purposes, it's also useful, but also organizations are hooking that to their SIEMs, to other data sources where they can evaluate what's been happening, whether there were targeted attacks against different workloads that they have that they might have not been aware of. So with that, we can easily show that in the report, in the activity log, in the event log, but also export it to a SIEM to have another layer of defense there.
Awesome. Awesome. Very fascinating. So with that, we are actually at the top of the hour. Andy, if you could show the contact slide once more. To all of our attendees, I thank you so very much for spending a little bit of your day with us. If you're interested in a deeper conversation around either a dark data assessment, around a D3P, or would like to engage in a no pressure, no obligation POC of Vicarius, by all means, please reach out to us. We will be happy to assist you in any way we can. Uh, with that, I will go ahead and give you your day back. Again, thank you so very much for attending, and we hope to hear from you soon.